Hello. Welcome to Civilization Jihad Awareness, the show where truth wins every time. Today we've been having some studio difficulties, so I hope things work out fine. Can everybody hear me in the chat room? Just want to make sure that I'm being heard because we're having difficulties in the studio today. But let's get back to on this term Civilization Jihad, and I just want to make sure everybody understands who's listening that it's not something I made up. It is something created by the Muslim Brotherhood to describe their war against North America. And we know this because we discovered a document hidden in someone's hidden secret sub-basement called the Explanatory Memorandum. Now, this document, I'm only going to read one paragraph from a document written by the Muslim Brotherhood in 1991 here in the United States. And this one paragraph says this. Number 4, understanding the role of the Muslim Brotherhood in North America. The process of settlement is a civilization jihadist process with all the word means. The Ikhwan must understand that their work in America is a kind of grand jihad in eliminating and destroying the Western civilization from within and sabotaging its miserable house by their hands and the hands of the believers, so that it is eliminated and God's religion is made victorious over all other religions. Without this level of understanding, we are not up to this challenge and have not prepared ourselves for jihad yet. It is a Muslim's destiny to perform jihad and work wherever he is and wherever he lands until the final hour comes. Is no escape from that destiny except for those who choose to slack. But would the slackers and the mujahideen be equal? Well, today we have with us one incredible person who is going to share just incredible information today. We have Len Getz. He's a CPA, recently retired from the Internal Revenue Service. And he and Cliff Rieders wrote together an article for the Clarion Project on how the IRS could help shut down radicalization. To me, I like to change the terminology and make it Islamization. Worry about Islamists because that's what we're talking about. And what radical Islam is. And we're going to try bringing him in on the headset first since that's on. So just, Len, if you're listening, I'm going to try the headset first. Okay. And let's see if the studio lets me. Hello, Len.
I have the headset on, and I also have my phone on.
Okay. So just in case. So you're ready. Thank you. The studio bumped me out, which is I haven't had that happen in quite a while, but
okay.
we're live. Everybody says they can hear us, and that's the important part.
All right, so I'll go with the headset.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
It's nice to know that things can work.
Right.
Let me get to my questions. I'm sorry for sounding disorganized. It's just that when you get everything going and the studio starts fighting you, then you have a problem.
I understand.
Well, I'm expecting today to be a great interview. And let me say, your article, How the IRS Could Shut Down Radicalization, starts with a premise that Islamic terrorist ideologies are being taught on college campuses and in the communities. How is this being done today, and how did you learn this?
Well, I first learned about Islamic influence on the universities and became seriously interested in it when I read Robert Spencer's book, Stealth Jihad, How Radical Islam is Subverting America Without Guns or Bombs. And he had a chapter in there. He had 2 chapters, one about the middle schools and the high schools, and a chapter on Islamic influence on the universities. And he opened the chapter by discussing a particular professor, Professor Omid Safi of the Colgate University, and he gave his students a course called Islam and Modernity. And the students were given an assignment, and they're given a list of people who he labeled as unrepentant Orientalists, outright Islamophobes, neoconservatives, conservatives, Western triumphalists, right-wing Christian evangelicals, and they were told to write a report on each one of them. And the people who were on the list were Bernard Lewis, Paul Wolfowitz, Charles Kraftheimer, Daniel Pipes, Jerry Falwell, Robert Spencer, Ibn Warraq, who was a Muslim who left Islam. So clearly, this professor was telling his students that these people are enemies of Islam. And the assignment didn't give any leeway for his students to express any other point of view. And besides, when you look at this list of people, you ask yourself, what do these have to do with Islam and modernity anyway? And of course, absent from that list were people who preached jihad and called for the death of the infidels, which they do in numerous mosques in this country and around the world. So it's a perfect example of students being taught what to think instead of how to think. And then he turns his attention to the University of North Carolina, where the students, the freshmen, are given a book to read called Approaching the Quran, The Early Revelations by Michael Sells. Now, the early revelations discuss tolerance between Muslims and non-Muslims. It's the later revelations where you talk about the doctrines of jihad, but they're not required to read that. So here we have, by omission, facts that are being distorted because the entire nature of Islam is not being taught to the students. They're only being taught, they're not being taught the motives of Islamic jihadists. They're not being taught why Muslims become terrorists. The teaching of intolerance of Islam is that lead to terrorism are being suppressed, while the teaching, the parts of the Quran that discusses intolerance, or I should say, the parts that are being discussed are the ones that are discussed talk about tolerance, and those are the ones that are being emphasized. And this is not just true for University of North Carolina, but throughout universities throughout the country. As Bernard Lewis, who's an expert on the Middle East, he says these Middle East programs on the colleges have been colonized by Muslim and Arab scholars who have politicized the field and intimidated Western scholars. Another professor, Robert Landis, he said, the degree of thought control and limitation of freedom of expression is without parallel in the Western world. So it seems to me, though, that the underlying cause for this surrender to Islamic indoctrination on the American universities is the embrace of this concept of multiculturalism, where every culture, except the American culture, is accepted and respected, and if you don't, well, you're intolerant and you're a racist. A college professor or administrator wants to be accused of being such a person. So let's allow the spread of Islamic fundamentalism and supremacism on our campuses. And so lest I be labeled as Islamophobic. So with this type of thinking, or lack of thinking, this opens the doors to billionaires such as the Saudi Prince Alawid bin Talal, who's only too happy to pour money into the Middle East chairs at Georgetown University and Harvard University, and these universities are only too happy to accept it and keep doing what they're doing. In fact, do it even better, and by promoting the Saudi Wahhabism thought school of thought, and even he passed away. That the head of the Muslim American Society, Imam W.
Yeah, and
Muhammad.
he was gonna be my next question. So Muslim American Society Imam Warith Muhammad is mentioned in your article. His name popped up this month in National Geographic as a Muslim who was inspirational to American Muslims today. What did he say about the Georgetown University's bin Talal scholarship funds?
He said,
and how does this violate tax code?
So Sorry. He said, well, yeah, I'll get into that. He said these donations are not intended to fund objective scholarship. They're meant to forward the Wahhabi school of thought. That's what he said. He should know what he's talking about. Dori Gold was the former Israeli ambassador to the UN. He wrote a book, Hatred's Kingdom, how Saudi Arabia supports the new global terrorism. And Saudi Arabia has been putting money into, their first donation was back in 1976 to the University of Southern California. So the question here is, what does that got to do with tax law? How does one interplay with the other? So IRC 501c3 talks about tax exemptions, and to be tax exempt, you must operate exclusively for religious, or charitable, or scientific, or literary, or educational purposes. It has to be exclusively for that. Then there's Treasury regulations. There's another section that sort of expands upon it, and it says it provides that the term educational relates to the instruction or training of the individual for the purpose of improving or developing his capabilities, the instruction of the public on subjects useful to the individual and beneficial to the community. So, under this regulation, an organization can be educational even though it advocates a particular position or viewpoint, so long as it presents a sufficiently full and fair exposition of the pertinent facts so as to permit an individual or public to form an independent opinion or conclusion. On the other hand, if an organization is not educational, if its principal function is merely the presentation of unsupported opinion and distortion of facts, well, then it's not educational and therefore does not meet the requirements of 501c3. So there are just a handful of court cases out there, and one of them sort of ruled that the term educational was sort of constitutionally vague. And so what the Internal Revenue Service did in 1986 to help them handle these issues, they came up with what they call Revenue Procedures 8643, in which they came up with criteria that would determine whether an education institution was truly educational or not. And if it doesn't fit the criteria, or I should say, this is actually a negative criteria, if it fits any of these criteria, then it's deemed non-educational, and they wouldn't have their tax-exempt status. So, for example, criteria number one, a significant portion of the group's communication consists of presentations of viewpoints or positions that are unsupported by facts. The facts that purport to support the viewpoints or positions are distorted. The group's presentation makes substantial use of inflammatory and disparaging terms and express conclusions based more on emotional feelings than on objective evaluation. And the presentation does not take into consideration the audience's understanding of the subject matter, because it does not consider their background. In this case, we're talking about impressionable students, young people, 18, 19 years old, who rely on their professors, their instructors, to tell them the truth. They went up there and they're giving them facts and giving information, then the students would tend to believe it. Why not? They're instructors. That's what they're paying for. They're being paid to be educated. So if you take a look at Georgetown University, and the Middle East Forum does a whole expose about Georgetown University and the person who was the founder, or I guess the chairman of the Prince Walid bin Talal Center for Muslim Christian Understanding. This prince gave $20 million to Georgetown and also to Harvard. So he says things like, Islam's violence is beyond the bounds of approved research.
Oh, okay. Can you repeat that? It kind of broke up there.
Oh, I'm sorry. Islam's violence is beyond the bounds of approved research. Islamist movements are movements of democratic reform. So can that be supported by facts? Can that presentation's facts be distorted? Can you actually truly get up there and say these things, and can it be challenged? But if he's only giving that point of view, and that's his opinion, then it's not really educational. It's more like indoctrination, which is what Robert Spencer's book is all about. Subverting America without guns and without bombs. So this individual, John Esposito, the Investigative Project on Terrorism, found Esposito is aligned with people involved in terrorism. For example, the convicted terrorist Sami al-Arian, who is an acknowledged member of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, an organization that's on the State Department list of terrorist organizations. But when he was on trial as part of the Holy Land Foundation, Esposito called, and by the way, Alian acknowledged he was a member of the Muslim Brotherhood. That's not it's not a garden party organization. That's charitable. We all know what the Muslim Brotherhood is about. Nevertheless, John Esposito calls him a man, proud man, dedicated and committed to America, a man of conscience, with a strong commitment to peace and social justice. So, in displaying support for Iran and his ilk, Esposito and his colleagues are willfully confusing Islam and the corrosive ideology of Islam and stymieing the learning process, because you're not really giving the students, both sides of what Islam is about. If you're suppressing one side, you're not being educational. So who takes his place? But a man named Jonathan Brown, who is I believe he's the son-in-law of terrorist Sami al-Arian, and he converted to Muslim himself.
Did he marry Layla?
I believe so.
Wow.
So. So he gives a talk in Georgetown about the Muslim embrace of slavery, and he actually supports that. He doesn't support slavery when it takes place in historically, in American society or Western society, but he praises the practices of slavery in Islam and explains that the Muslim slaves lived a pretty good life. Now, how does he know that? Has he interviewed any? Did he bring any to his classroom? Do they think they're living a pretty good life? But this is what Brown wants his students to believe. They also talked about that if you're having relations, it's okay to have relations with your slave, and whether and it doesn't have to be consensual, but that's okay if you're an Islamic slave. So this is the kind of thing that's being taught to students. And again, you have to ask, does this fit the parameters of Internal Revenue Procedure 8643? Are they true? Are the facts distorted? Are they considering their audience? Well, they are considering the audience because they want to, they want to shape their minds into thinking a certain way. The Middle East Forum did a really great critique of Georgetown, and let me just read you what they say in their critique. This critique of Georgetown professors is not intended to infringe on their freedom of expression, but to demonstrate how they have abused their positions to corrupt the academic environment. By injecting political activism into their language, methods, and theory, they distort the politics and society of the Middle East. So if that's the case, then they are not conforming to Rev. Proc 8643. Now, all of us can't take courses at Georgetown University to really get firsthand experience. You'd have to probably take a course to listen to what they have to say. But we all can go on a Georgetown website called Bridging the Gap. And that's all about, I don't know if you're familiar with that, Paul, if you've seen that website.
Yes, very familiar. Yes.
Okay. So that's all about Islamophilia. And they're trying to explain that this exists all over the country, and there's no reason. Well, first of all, there's no reason to. Nobody should hate a certain group of people just because they're Muslim. Just like nobody should hate Jews because they're Jews, or black people because they're black. I mean, that's pretty clear. But they're trying to whitewash Islamic terrorism, and they are saying that they're saying that if you criticize Islamic terrorism or jihadists, well, you must be Islamophobic. But is there any room to think that most people they see terrorists invoking the name of Muslim terrorists, but they invoke Islam? Isn't it reasonable for people to be wary or skeptical about Islam if, say, there's so much terrorism done by Muslims and they're invoking Islam? It's a fair question, but they don't let that point of view exist on that website. They refer to Pamela Geller as an anti-Muslim blogger, but when you go to Pamela Geller's website and she talks about all these accusations that are against her, she says it's slanderous, it's unfair. I believe Muslims are more victimized by Islamic supremacists than even non-Muslims. She also goes out of her way to support Muslim women who are in tragic situations. So here it's an example of being disparaging. So here it's an educational institution, Georgetown University. They have this website up, and they're being disparaging against individuals without giving the people who they're accusing an opportunity to refute themselves or refute it and support themselves. There's also an interesting discussion on there about Robert Spencer. They say here, people who harbor a prejudice towards a particular group often present their criticism of that group as reasonable observations of their behavior. So here they're making this presumption that Robert Spencer is prejudiced. And they say here, by pointing to examples after examples of violence on the part of Muslims, Spencer is able to shield himself from the accusations of prejudice, and that by those who have a low opinion of Islam have it because Islamic violence, despite of the Islamic supremacy of propaganda, the industries is a result of Islamophobia. In other words, you're just Islamophobic. That you hate Muslims, and you're just using these examples of terrorism as excuses to cover up, to explain your Islamophobia. So it's like a backwards viewpoint. Now, they don't say or provide any evidence that Robert Spencer denies that Islamophobia exists. It does nothing to dispel the view that it's not unreasonable to have a skeptical view of Islam because so many terrorists invoke Islam when they're in their terrorist actions. It's a perfect. The Bridge Initiative is a perfect example of not acknowledging the negative aspects of Islam and how it's understandable that people may be wary and skeptical because so much terrorism in the world invokes Islam. And again, this goes back to Esposito's long career and his effective efforts of denying or making short shrift of jihadist threat, and instead pointing accusatory figures at the rest of the world of being Islamophobist, and what they need is to be educated and think like him.
We call that propaganda.
So exactly. So it's okay for the Bridge Initiative to have its point of view, but it's not okay to deny your audience a sufficiently full and fair exposition of all the pertinent facts. which is what this website does not do. So I also discuss the Alavi Foundation.
Okay, let's. I want to go back a little bit. What other universities are tied to Wahhabism that you're aware of?
Well, the only one that I see, if you're talking about the ones that are Saudi funded, you have the Harvard University, and you also have the University of California, Berkeley. And I want to talk about that as well. I can talk about it now. I can talk about it later.
Okay. We can talk about. Are you aware of Yale as well? Because Yale received millions of dollars to start basically a Sharia school.
Okay, I haven't gone into that. There's so many. There's
a lot out there.
There's a lot out there. Yeah.
It's interesting they're picking our Ivy League schools to do this in too. Let's talk about. It's the Alavi. Am I saying that right? Alavi Foundation.
The Alavi Foundation. So they call themselves a non-for-profit organization that's in New York. They give $50 million for charitable activities. Their mission, they say, is to promote charitable and philanthropic causes through education and religious and cultural programs. However, federal prosecutors say the foundation is merely a front for the Iranian government to transfer rental income from their huge property and skyscrapers in New York and give it to its Iranian bank. And this took place during the U.S. sanctions in 2007 for support of nuclear program. So the jury deliberated for a day and found that the Alavi Foundation violated United States sanctions against Iran. Now we have here the Alavi Foundation distributes millions of dollars since 1973 to Harvard, Columbia, Princeton, Rutgers University, Bard University, University of Virginia, Brandeis University, Catholic University of America, and numerous others. So much so that even Congressman Dan Donovan, in August 2017, he asked the question, did this foundation attempt to subvert American academic institutions? We need to investigate this, and the universities have to do a better job of vetting their donors. I got to ask myself, they probably are vetting their donors, and they're very happy to take their money. They probably know exactly who they are and what this is all about. So it's kind of like, it's unfortunate that these universities are just allow themselves to be vessels for Islamic indoctrination. Michael Rubin, who's an expert on Iran, he works at the American Enterprise Institute. He says this is all about Iran laundering their policies through the academia. So let's look at some of the statements that some of these professors make. Professors at Rutgers, for example. Professor Houshang Amirabi. I'm sorry to try that again. Houshang Amihamadi. He says, unfortunately, a large part of the problems between Iran and the U.S. are not based on reality, but they are based on myths. The problem of terrorism is a true myth. Iran has not been involved in any terrorist organizations, neither has Hezbollah or Hamas. They are not terrorist organizations. Well, let me ask you, is that a true fact? Is that a distortion? And if it is, well, then it's a violation of Reg Proc 8643. Now let's talk about another professor at Rutgers, Jasper Puar. Susan Tuckman from the Zionist Organization of America just wrote an article about her. Jasper Puar is the associate professor in the Department of Women's and Gender Studies at Rutgers. And she says, Mrs. Tuckman says, masquerading as scholarship, she has made false and outrageous accusations against Israel that cross into the line of anti-Semitism. She delivered a lecture at Vassar College, and she told the audience that Israel has mined for organs for scientific research from dead Palestinian Arabs, which of course is a bold-faced lie.
Yes,
and borders
definitely.
on modern-day anti-Semitism. So she's, okay, if you want to have your bigoted views, you're entitled to them, but you're not entitled to your own facts, And as an educator, truth should matter to universities like Rutgers and the president of Rutgers, President Barchi. Yet, the New Jersey State University is unwittingly giving legitimacy to Puar's anti-Semitic falsehoods, affording her the prominent platforms for her bigotry, and the university is doing nothing about it. The president should at least be condemning her for these claims, which are factually inaccurate. So if she's making factually inaccurate statements and inflammatory statements, well, those are clear violations of Reg Proc 8643. Yet, they're not doing anything about it. They're letting it slide. Columbia University, Professor Rashid Khaladi, he's in charge of a Palestinian organization there. They have 90% of their events have been anti-Israel. He's made statements like, for example, he worries that Jews will infest the Trump administration. And he says that Jerusalem is and has to be seen as the capital of Palestine, of a Palestinian state. Well, does it have to be? Must it be? Or is that just his opinion? Is that a fact? Or is that a distortion of the facts? Is he saying that? Or is he giving a point of view? Is he allowing somebody else to give another point of view? Again, this is going to continue. We have here universities who are being funded by Saudi and Iranian donations, and we have these professors promoting their courses. Several years ago, there was a documentary called Columbia Unbecoming. And
yes, that's a good one.
Exactly, and it talked about the harassment of Jewish students by professors, by Arab and Muslim professors. Right on they have their program is called MESAS, Middle Eastern, Southern Asian, and African Studies. And these professors, I'll just give you some examples. Professor Joseph Massad, he says, the Jews are not a nation. The Jewish state is a racist state that does not have a right to exist. Well, that could be his opinion. All right, he has a right to his opinion, but that's not factual. You can't prove that. He says here, there is a vulgarity, a character of Israeli Jews that is bone deep and structural to the skeletal vertebrae of his culture. Wow. Well, that could be his opinion, but if he's preventing that to his students, well, he has to prove that. Is that his opinion? Is that inflammatory? Well, absolutely. I think it's inflammatory. Recently, the Forward wrote an article and talked about the Columbia Unbecoming, and it says that he says here, what's important is that the hostility and mistreatment of Jewish students we noted in 2004 has metastasized. Over the past 12 years, anti-Israel animus has spread from the classroom to discussions of the Quad and beyond, and made things very, very uncomfortable for Israel students on these campuses. So, for example, we have another brilliant professor, Hamid Dabash, on his Facebook page. Now, he's a professor of Iranian Studies and Comparative Literature at Columbia. Now, he's saying this on his Facebook page, right? He's not necessarily saying this in his classroom. where he says, every dirty, treacherous, ugly, pernicious act happening in the world, just wait a few days and the ugly name of Israel will pop up. So when the president of Columbia University, President Lee Bollinger, is asked to make a statement about that, he says, what a faculty member says in the course of public debate, we will not take that into account within the university. Really? He said, that's a dangerous slope. Dangerous?
So
really?
so he's allowed to present materials that are not factual, and there's no penalty?
Apparently not. Apparently not. And when he says it's a dangerous slope, well, isn't it more dangerous to allow this to be said and for the students to hear it? Won't that give rise to hostility against Jewish students? Isn't that more dangerous?
Absolutely.
And if he said the same, if he said this stuff, the inflammatory things about Afro Americans or gay people, what would be the response from the University of Columbia? I'm sure.
Well,
I guess they wouldn't.
Maybe they shouldn't say anything. Just allow it. It's okay. But yeah, we both know it's not going to be the same result.
I don't think so. I don't think so at all. I think you're right. This should be repudiated. He should be repudiated, and he should be fined. He should be suspended. I mean, if you're a university professor and you're putting stuff out as a university professor, and it says so on his website, on his Facebook, he says, "I'm a university professor." You know, you're putting stuff out as a university professor. You can't. How can you distinguish yourself when you're on Facebook with regard and from when you're a professor and sitting on the college? It's more difficult to apply the tax codes when you're doing it on Facebook, I admit. But you wonder, what is he saying in the classroom? You say this is what he believes, then could he be believing one thing when he's on Facebook and telling the students something else in the classroom? I would doubt it.
It's a big concern I have, and I've seen that happen locally in my area with Nazareth College. They took $500,000 from a IIIT, the International Institute of Islamic Thought, and that's just another organization on top of all what you're talking about. It's amazing.
It's just what's so sad is that and you believe this as well, that we see terrorism. The news reports terrorist events in this country, in Europe. And when it's done by Muslims, they invoke Islam. So everybody sees that. What they don't see is the underhanded stuff. They don't see what Robert Spencer talks about as the stealth jihad, getting into the universities. The Clarion Project just did an expose about that a little while ago. It talked about how Islam is infiltrating the universities, and there's an organization that
Canary Mission.
I think that name sounds familiar, but it's also the Intel. Let me see. Another organization or another. Let me see. If
Campus Watch.
Yeah, Campus Watch. Well, if Islamist infiltration of American universities. He says here, in 1988, the FBI source inside the Muslim Brotherhood revealed that Islamist groups, proxies in America, had a 6-phase plan to institute Islamic revolution in the United States. Among these front groups was the International Institute of Islamic Thought, a think tank committed to the Islamization of knowledge. This idea, as Professor Vali Nasser writes, entails subordination of scientific inquiry and mere implementation of assured teachings of Sharia. And it gives a list of all the universities that are associated with this institute, International Institute of Islamic Thought. So this is another way of them getting inside the civilization of America and influencing our students. It says here, it's been too low. American universities have allowed this organization, IIT, to shape the development of Islamic studies in this country. They have ignored, the university have ignored its anti-intellectualism expressed in its commitment to the Islamization of knowledge, meaning the suppression of scholarship and not sympathetic to Islam. Left-wing activists who censor campus discussions about radical Islam provide a cover for the IIT's regression of ideology. So it's all over. It's all over, and we're ignoring it. It's just happening,
and that's the
big
issue. You're awake, I'm awake, and that's the thing. What we're doing is sounding an alarm. This isn't too many colleges, is what you're saying. And we haven't even gotten to the point where we're even talking about what's happening in San Francisco State University. I know your article mentions that, and it's going to Cinnamon Stillwell of Campus Watch. She's one of the first people I had on my show. She's alumni from there, so she gets more information than the average person. She writes about the anti-Semitism and the Islamist growth on that campus.
Right.
So how are they violating the tax code?
Well, there was two things involved there. One of them, let me explain this. The San Francisco State University has just entered. Well, not just they entered into a memorandum of understanding with Najah National University in what they call the West Bank, or what they call Palestine. And if you look at the student groups on this university, they are all Hamas-related student groups. And you have, I think it was the Washington Institute of Middle East Policy actually said that this university is a hotbed of Hamas recruitment. Students go there and they get recruited into Hamas. And I think the ADL said exactly the same thing. This university is a hotbed of Hamas recruitment. Now, Hamas is a terrorist organization designated by the State Department as a terrorist organization. So here you have a state university of San Francisco. They receive funding from the federal government and the state. They form an alliance with a university in the West Bank that has ties to Hamas, a terrorist organization. And by the way, the member of understanding allows for a transfer of students, for a student exchange. So they could be sending their students, or theoretically they could be sending their students to this university in the West Bank, and they could be exposed to Hamas recruitment. On the other hand, this university can send students to San Francisco State University, and they all could be members of Hamas. I mean, see the danger in that?
Extreme danger.
And so, is there enough of a nexus there to say that San Francisco State University is now supporting terrorist organizations? And that's also against it. That would be against IRC 501p. So it's something to really look into, and maybe the IRS will look into that. Now,
I'm going to end up sending, because of the comments you're making about this, I'm going to end up sending this interview to Campus Watch and hoping they'll post it up, because I think what you're saying is so important. We have to look at this. It's so important.
I think so. And you have the president of San Francisco State University, Wesley Long. He says, when I returned from Palestine, I said I want to be the first major university to sign an agreement with Najah. He says, I am pleased to have attracted a group of radicals.
Okay,
Shake
Len, you
the
just broke.
academic university.
Len,
Oh,
you just broke up a little bit. Can we start back where you said you started talking about he introduced himself to a group of what?
can you hear me now?
Yes. It just
Okay.
sometimes I guess the
Okay.
airways break.
He said, I want to be the first major university to sign an agreement with this university, Anaja. And he says, I'm pleased to be attracted to a group of radicals so that when I propose ideas, that would shake the academic world or academic community, and they will say, I'm right behind you. Well, what does a university president mean, but they want to attract a group of radicals? What kind of university professor who's responsible for the safety of his students say he wants to attract a group of radicals? I mean, is that educational? Remember, the first aspect of 501c3 means you have to be truly educational. How is it educational to attract a group of radicals to your school? That seems to me a violation of 501c3. Yet, it's being done. There was just a word.
Wow.
At San Francisco University, there's a group called the General Union of Palestinian Students, and they have horrible anti-Israel events, and which spill into anti-Jewish events. They had the mayor of Jerusalem spoke, and these groups, and this group is actually the head of this group is one of the professors at San Francisco University. I think I have the name here somewhere. Yeah,
Hatem Bazian.
Exactly. So she's in charge of this group. She's actually went to the university. She went to the Middle East, paid for by the San Francisco State University, and she meets terrorists who align with Hamas. So now you have the funding being used to meet with people from Hamas. Well, why are they being meeting with a terrorist organization?
Might have a different name because Hatem Bazia leads SJP. I was thinking that was, but there's a different one there. Maybe. Sorry about that.
SJP, right? So maybe another one. It's Professor Rabab Abou Hadi.
But that says something. We have the leader of SJP at San Francisco State University, and they want to get radicals into the school. So they not only have the Hamas front man, Hatem Bazian, they have who? Rob, say her name again?
Yeah, okay. Right. So this is the professor at this university. She's the faculty advisor for GUPS, which is the General Union for Palestinian Students. So the advisor here is Professor Rahab Abdul Hadi.
How many people do you have to have at your university that will suppress other opinions before you get your IRS code? You get a violation of your IRS tax code. Come on, that's ridiculous.
Well, how many? That's a good question. So let me go back to this point here. So this professor meets with terrorist Layla Khalid and Sheikh Rashid Salah during a university-funded trip to the Middle East. Now, isn't that a violation of the tax exempt status when you're using the money to meet with terrorists?
Exactly.
Again, I think so, but it needs to be looked into. It needs to be looked into. So you mentioned SJP, the Students for Justice in Palestine. Several years ago, Jonathan Schanzer testified before the House Foreign Affairs Committee. He was a former terrorism financial analyst for the Department of the Treasury. And he described how Hamas funnels large funds of money to organizations such as the Students for Justice in Palestine. Now, if you want to talk about justice in Palestine, if you want to talk about that and say whether their justice not being, there is no justice for them, well, you can say that, and that's perfectly fine. But what you can't do is be violent about it and attack Jewish students and be repressive and have apartheid demonstrations and burn flags. That's not part of being educational. So here the question is, does a university that allows its campus to be a platform for Hamas-funded student organizations, does that affect your tax-exempt status? I would think it does. I would think it does.
And you have the president of the college on record saying he wants more of that.
Right, he wants more.
I think they would just do it right there. Holy cow!
They would. I would think so.
So now I have a question. Why do you think the IRS is sitting on its hands and not acting on these items that are very public?
Right. So a couple of things, a couple of reasons. I don't think it ever occurred to them. I don't think it ever got into their mind that these venerable universities would be violating their tax status. I don't think it was ever on their radar. And for them to be, it just wouldn't occur to them that this is, what they're doing on the universities. Well, it's part of freedom of speech. It's part of freedom of speech. So it never occurred, and I don't think I ever looked into it. But now, having it brought to their attention, the tax exempt division is still smarting from that whole Tea Party fiasco, and I would think they'd be reluctant to get themselves in something that's so controversial after being so written up about negatively about their tax exempt division. So that's another reason. Another reason is funding. The enforcement budget for IRS has been reduced considerably. They barely have enough funds to perform their own, tax audits and collecting taxes. That's out there. And I think, I think they think be better funded so they can do things like this. They also may think that, this is a big undertaking, and do we have the personnel available that understands this enough? Understands the nuances with regard to education about Islam and Muslims, and are they able to distinguish between fact and fiction? So, my answer to all these questions would be: number one, you need to put the Tea Party fiasco behind you, and not let them impede the task that you're charged to do, which is investigate tax-exempt organizations that are non-compliance. With regard to the funding, I think they should be better funded. I think IRS needs to be better funded. But if we're stuck with this budget, then they should find a way to make this a priority. They didn't do it. They did nothing about it when they were better funded. Well, it should be a priority now, because if you look back and say, well, this is as you know, and as I just read to you about what these organizations want to do, they want to permeate to the American society, and one way that they're attacking it is through the universities. So IRS, I believe, should make this a priority to investigate these Saudi and Iranian-funded Middle East studies programs, and programs that are funded by Hamas, like the Students for Justice in Palestine. So they can, back in the 30s, when Al Capone was running Chicago, and he was a gangster, and he was involved in all sorts of illegal activities and murder and thievery, and law enforcement was able to him into anything. They weren't able to do it. It took an IRS agent to stop him. Well, this is another Al Capone moment for the IRS.
I agree with you 100%. Mr. Getz, how can everybody follow your work? I was just extremely impressed with your article, and I had to have you and your partner on. I got lucky to get one of you. Wow. What was your question? How can they follow your work?
Well, I wrote the article, and I sent it. It was published in one small newspaper, and I sent it to Clarion. And they were very happy that they published it on their website. How do I follow their work? I do. So I don't work for the Clarion, and I'm just going to continue to do what I'm going to try to do, and try to get the IRS to do something about this. It's not an easy thing to do. What I think that needs to be done, if the President of the United States would impose a directive or executive order to apply and enforce Rev Proc 8643 on the American universities, that would be a very good thing. That would spark the IRS to do something about it. There's a precedent for this. Before he left office, President Obama said under Title IX of the Education Amendment Act of 1972, he issued a letter to all the colleges and universities receiving federal funds requiring them to investigate all sexual discrimination and assault claims using the preponderance of the evidence standard to find students or professors guilty of wrongdoing. That is, using that standard as opposed to the clear and convincing standard. And the colleges and universities complied immediately and faithfully. In the end, a lot of these issues went to court, and there was a disaster for them because they weren't able to enforce it. But I think it'd be a better way. I think it'd be more successful in enforcing these tax codes on the universities than Obama was. Also, there's a Treasury regulations, 501 K-1, that says you cannot be a tax-exempt organization if you're communist controlled. That is, if you're deemed to be a communist organization, you can't be tax-exempt. So maybe the same thing can be done for the Muslim Brotherhood. It's not impossible. To create another Treasury regulation.
A political entity that makes perfect sense.
Right.
I want to thank you for joining us. It's been
all over?
Very, very informative. Wow, this is just. I know I'm going to be sending this interview to people who work for the Middle East Forum, and I'm hoping that as a result, I don't know if you've met Daniel Pipes. I have.
I know Daniel Pipes. I know him well.
I think. In fact,
I wrote an article about him many years ago.
I think he would enjoy, or I don't know if you know Cinnamon, but I think they would both enjoy spending time talking with you and seeing what action can be done.
Yes, I have reached out
think
to
that
them.
their organization would work with you to do something on this.
Yes, I have reached out to them, and we are in discussion.
Good.
So that's good. By the way, how do I get to hear this interview?
I'm going to put it up on YouTube, and as soon as we're done, as soon as the show is over, about 15 to 20 minutes after it becomes a podcast. But I'm going to take the interview afterwards, which I do with all my interviews, and put them up on YouTube. It'll probably be up tomorrow.
Okay.
Or Friday.
Is somebody can send me a link to?
Yes, I will definitely send you a link.
Oh, okay, fine. All right, very good, very good.
And I'm going to, if you send me your email address, if you send me your snail mail address, I will send you a copy of my book, Civilization, Jihad, and the Myth of Modern Islam, which covers a lot of what you talked about. I got involved in this because of what I discovered on a college campus. The only reason I'm in this game at all is because of what I discovered locally. And so I think you'll find that part interesting. And goes along with everything you covered. I have to say thank you. You're a great patriot, and America's
Well,
going to owe
you.
you a debt of gratitude in the future.
Well, I hope
Thank
so.
you.
I hope something can be done. Because if we do nothing, it'll just continue. It'll be worse.
Exactly. God bless you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
I hope to have you back in the future.
Me. All right. Thank you very much, Paul. Bye-bye.
Wow. It's outstanding to have a great patriot like Leonard Getz come out and tell us we could be taking care of things. There's no excuse for what is happening. Why? And he's right, pointing out we did reduce the budget for the IRS. They have a very reduced budget. But at the same time, these things have been going on for over 50 years now in this country. Over 50 years, because the Muslim Brotherhood came in 1963. And their organization, 60, to go back and double check my date. My brain is freezing on the exact date. Holy cow, we could be using the tax code to suppress the Islamist totalitarian view. Now, that may be the other thing. You can't, in education, we're not allowed to promote totalitarian views. And that's what Islam is all about. He is incredibly knowledgeable. Leonard Getz, people, I'm going to have him back. Wow. Going on to the news, I kind of feel like that was really power-packed. I'll try to get into this. There is just so much sad news around the world this week. And I have great knowledge that there's no way I'm going to go through all these stories. So let's start with one of the ones that hits home. So if you have children in school, you've gone to a high school in the United States, and when you graduate from high school or when you go to high school, at the end of the year, you get something called a yearbook. This week, Jihad Watch, Robert Spencer, this is only May 14th, and what is that, 2 days ago, revealed that in California, there's a public high school yearbook that has a lavish 2-page Islam presentation entitled Allah Akbar. And there's a tweet on this. It talks about, and the high school in Rancho Cucamonga has a spread in their yearbook that says Allah Akbar, not one mention of Christianity in the yearbook. Now, Allah Akbar, this is Robert Spencer's article. Allah Akbar means Allah is greater than your God. It is a declaration of superiority. Jihad mass murderers the world over scream Allah Akbar as they murder people. 9/11 hijacker Muhammad Atta reminded himself to shout Allah Akbar because this strikes fear in the hearts of the non-believers. And here it is in the Rancho Cucamonga High School yearbook because they are tolerant, multicultural, diverse, and against racism. Islam is not a race. Let's get this straight, people. The Rancho Cucamonga High School yearbook contains no pages on Judaism, Christianity, Hinduism, Buddhism, or anything else. Why does it contain these pages on Islam? Because it is the prevailing view among leftists today that Muslims are persecuted, harassed, and discriminated against. This is insane. Both claims are nonsense. The FBI's latest hate crime statistics show that Jews are twice more likely to be the victims of hate crimes than Muslims. Yet there is no presentation on Judaism in their yearbook. And if anyone does have a negative opinion of Islam, it's because of jihad terror, not ignorance of Islam. I see this as a reason to revoke several things. This is violation of several issues in education. I would, if this is a case where the principal and the staff person who was over the yearbook should be highly disciplined, and that could range from a suspension to even possibly revocation of credentials because this is basically teaching something you're not allowed to teach, and this is a problem. And putting Allah Akbar in a yearbook, I hope to God none of the children who take that home have parents or relatives who served in the military protecting America, because that would be horrible. Now, let's get a little more hot as far as what's going on this week. If you're not aware, Fox 9 News did an article out of Minneapolis, Minnesota, about millions of dollars in suitcases flying out of the Minnesota St. Paul airport. The article here is by Jeff Balon. Now, this I found fascinating article. It says for 5 months, Fox 9 has been investigating what appears to be a rampant fraud in massive state program. The fraud is suspected of costing Minnesota taxpayers as much as $100 million a year. The Fox 9 investigators report is based on public records and nearly a dozen government sources who have direct knowledge of what is happening. These sources have a deep fear, and there is evidence to support their concerns that some of the public money is ending up in the hands of terrorists. Suitcases filled with money. The story begins in Minneapolis, St. Paul International Airport, where mysterious suitcases filled with cash have become a common carry-on. On the morning of March 15, Fox 9 chased a tip about a man who was leaving the country. Sources say he took a carry-on bag through security that was packed with $1 million in cash. Travelers can do that as long as they fill out the proper government form. Fox 9 learned that these cloak and dagger scenarios now happen almost weekly at MSP. Again, that's the Minneapolis St. Paul Airport. The money is usually headed to the Middle East, Dubai, and points beyond. Sources said last year more than $100 million in cash left the Minneapolis St. Paul in carry-on luggage. The national go-to expert of what is behind these mysterious money transfers is Glenn Kearns. What we were interested in is where it was going, Kearns said. He is a former Seattle police detective who spent 15 years on the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force until his retirement. It's an outright crime. It's unbelievable, he said. Kearns tracked millions of dollars in cash that was leaving on flights from Seattle. It was coming from hawalas, businesses used to courier money to countries that have no official banking system. Some immigrant communities rely on hawalas to spend funds to impoverished relatives back home. Kearns discovered some of the money was being funneled to a hawala in the region of Somalia that is controlled by the Al-Shabaab terrorist group. He said, I talked to a couple of sources who had lived in that region. I said, if money is going to this hawala, do you think it is going to Al-Shabaab? Said Kearns. Definitely. That area is controlled by Al-Shabaab, and they control the hawala there. He said, when the money arrives, whether it was intended for legitimate purposes or not, Al-Shabaab or other groups demand a cut. As Kearns dug deeper, he found that some of the individuals who were sending out tens of thousands of dollars worth of remittance payments happened to be on the government assistance in this country. How could they possibly come up with such big bucks to transfer back home? We had sources that told us it's a welfare fraud. It's all about daycare, said Kearns. To better understand the connection between daycare fraud and surge and carry-on cash, you have to look at the history of the crime. 5 years ago, the Fox 9 investigations were the first to report that daycare fraud was on the rise in Minnesota. I'm going to tell people this article is a little bit longer. You want to pay attention, find the link to this article and go on. I'm not going to end up reading the whole article, but think about that. Daycare fraud. Now, in your local area, and if you have a large number of Somalians in your area, like we do here out of Rochester, New York, I'm interested to know if anybody's investigating this. Is there a daycare fraud going on, and are they sending monies overseas? That would be interesting. I think it should be looked at on a nationwide scale rather than just out of Minnesota. This is very, very scary. Okay. And because of my pressed time, I'm going to be skipping several stories that I would love to cover. But one of these stories I want to get to because we have a problem here. And it's going to be facing us internationally. Here we go. Canada. This is from the CBC. Now, the CBC is a Canadian broadcast company. The CBC News. This is a tough article. Ayan al-Hassan Ali, accused of stabbing at Canadian Force Center, faces 9 charges. Now, I'm going to get into this. He was accused of this. It came out March 15th, yesterday. Man accused of stabbing 2 members of Canadian military at a recruitment center in Toronto is facing 9 charges in connection with the attack. Ayan Hassan Ali, 27-year-old born in Montreal, appeared in court Tuesday wearing white prison-issued overalls with his hands cuffed behind his back. The accused hung his head and looked down at the floor for most of the brief appearance. Now, he does this appearance, and what I want to get to is the follow-up to this. He gets, I guess I'm cutting really pressing time. There's some really big articles in Canada, and the one I was telling Kel that I am covering today is what they decided about this man. Here we go. I'm going to see the follow-up CBC. So I'm going to get to the follow-up CBC on this. Canadian Press. This is posted May 14th. A man who was with schizophrenia. No name of the author of this article given. CBC this is May 14th. A man with schizophrenia who attacked soldiers at a military recruitment center in Toronto has been terror-related charges and found not criminally responsible for lesser offenses due to mental illness. Judge Ian McDonald says Ayan Hassan Ali's actions in May 2016 do not fit the intended scope of Canadian terrorism laws. Listen closely to this, people. Ali had pled not guilty to 3 counts of attempted murder, 3 counts of assault with a weapon, 2 counts of assault causing bodily harm, and 1 count of carrying a weapon for the purpose of committing an offense, all for the benefit or at the direction of a terror organization. His lawyers had argued that because he committed his actions alone and had never been in contact with any terror group, he should not be found guilty of the terror charges. They also argued that he should not be found guilty criminally responsible for the lesser included offenses of attempted murder, assault, and weapons offenses. The prosecution argued that the Canadian terror laws could apply to Ali because he acted as a terror group of 1. The judge ruled against the Crown's argument, saying the federal government's intention behind terrorism laws must be taken into account. On March 14th, 2016, Ali entered a Canadian Forces recruitment office in North Toronto at 4900 Yonge Street, armed with a knife, and attacked uniformed soldiers, leaving at least 2 of them with minor injuries. He was then overpowered and subdued. He's lucky they didn't kick his ass more. According to an agreement statement of facts presented by the Crown in defense at trial, Ali repeatedly punched and slashed at 1 soldier, leaving the man with a 3-inch gash in his arm. Ali tried to stab or slash 3 other military personnel, one of whom was left with bruises and a small superficial nick, before being subdued, the statement said. The attack was motivated by the defendant's radical religious... This is a quote from the judge. The attack was motivated by the defendant's radical religious and ideological beliefs, but there's no dispute that the formation of those beliefs was in large part precipitated by mental disorder. The judge says. One of the beliefs, this again goes on, one of the beliefs that the defendant had formed in his mental disordered state was that killing Canadian military personnel was justified because the military was fighting in a Muslim land. Wait a minute. The judge recognizes this is all because of Islamic belief structure, but we can't charge him with a crime because he's a terrorist of 1? So the judge is making his own self this smart guy. He knows more than anybody else. There's no terrorism if there's just a terror group of 1. So what do you call what happened on Yonge Street a short time ago with that car going down and plowing down the people? I call it terrorism. Wow. Yes, and poor Canadians are paying for that, the CBC. Here's another article. Man found dead in car riddled with bullets in French no-go zone. This is by Chris Tomlinson of Breitbart. Came out May 15th. A man was found dead by French police in the no-go Parisian suburb over the weekend in his car, which was riddled with bullet holes in the last bout of violence in the troubled area. The man was shot either during the night on Sunday or in the early morning of Monday in the communities of Saint-Denis, which is part of a heavily migrant-populated Saint-Denis area. Police said the shooting took place in an area where violence between criminal gangs has become more common in recent months. One witness said at least a dozen shots were fired at the victim. The emergency services attempted to save him, but he died at the scene. Well, it's a no-go zone. Do you think they're going to get... They can't. They're not allowed. Until recently, the existence of migrant ghetto no-go zones was contested by leading politicians. The publication of Breitbart London editor Raheem Kassam's book, No-Go Zones, How Sharia Law is Coming to a Neighborhood Near You, in 2017 was filed months later by German Chancellor Angela Merkel, admitting that they do in fact exist. Well, the one thing that, one of the good things she actually said that was true. Wow. How about this one? Pay attention to this one. And I want you to think about if this school is in your area. This is by the metro.co.uk. Now, part of my article is unfortunately blanked, but let's see. This is by Adam Smith for the Metro, UK news source. An Islamic school accused of warning girls not to use tampons. But listen to the rest of the article. It's a lot more than tampons we're talking about. The Al-Hijra school, what does that mean, the migration? Reportedly sent out guidance in a memo to teachers, which called for physical, sexual, moral, and emotional development of pupils. The school also allegedly contained a book which said husbands can hit their wives and demand sex anytime, and that tampons may not be appropriate due to insertion. Muna Adil, the religious think tank Quillam, branded the advice misogynistic and misinformed. She said young girls already have a hard time dealing with the changing bodies at this age. To further ill-advise them on imaginary connotations of using tampons is shameful and must be condemned. The school's head teacher, Ashad Muhammad, said the guidance regarding the use of tampons is part of our sex education policy and is information related. This is just ridiculous. Come on. So you can tell they're advising people you can basically rape your wife whenever you want, and then they're saying, go ahead, beat your wife. So rape and beat her. This is the kind of thing they'll put in a regular home in Britain. In Great Britain. Paris knife attack by the BBC. Paris knife attack. Suspect French citizen born in Russia's Chechnya. This is by May 13th. Eyewitness Jonathan says that attacker's hands were covered in blood. The suspect in a deadly knife attack in central Paris on Saturday evening is a French citizen born in 1997 in Russia's Chechnya. Named by media as Kamazat Azimov. He was on a French watch list of people who could pose a threat to national security. Police shot dead the attacker in the busy Opera district after he killed a man and injured 4 other people. The Islamic State group said it was behind the attack. French President Emmanuel Macron tweeted in French, France has once again paid in blood. Well, do something, damn it. Later on Sunday, a judicial source said that a friend of the suspect had been detained for questioning in the eastern city of Strasbourg. France has been on high alert following a series of attacks. More than 230 people have been killed by Islamic State-inspired jihadists in the past 3 years. So what do we know about this attack? The suspect was not carrying any identification papers and has not yet been officially named, they said. So what I read you was the update. This is going back a ways. This guy is... When you start looking at this and they're not addressing anything. Remember, the Boston bomber was from Chechnya. Their family was from Chechnya. So we're looking at similar locations. There's a whole bunch of this stuff going on. How about this one? This one got me to, there's a couple articles I want to cover before the show ends, and we're running down on time. One of these, again, is another, I'm going to skip this one, unfortunately. If I was going to, I want to encourage people to take a look at the Dr. Ala Asadi, who basically sexually assaulted and was basically sexual assault and sexual harassment of his female colleagues. And he gets off because he's not, because his culture is different. So, I know in the United States, and it used to at least be in the UK, that ignorance of the law is not an excuse. But I guess it is if you're Muslim. Why? Because does that make you double ignorant or something? I don't know, but they're making excuses for Muslims for not following the law. Let me get to the one on Sweden, because this article on Sweden I want to talk about. Here is the thing that's going on in Sweden. Sweden is basically gone, people. You remember they're talking, I read a news story a couple weeks ago where church calls forbidden in town were, here we go. This is the article. It's from Voice of Europe by Joshua Cullen. Sweden, church calls forbidden in town where mosque is allowed to air 110 decibel Islamic call to prayer. This is May 12th. Thursday, we've reported that the mosque in Sweden's Vaxholm received permission to broadcast their call to prayer. But when the St. Michael's Church applied for a wake-up call for church services in the same city, they received a no. According to the priest Ingvar Folkvist, the town rejected his request to ring the bell because the sound would disturb the area. Folkvist's requests were 2 times rejected in the 90s and again in 2000s. He believes that the ringing is a nice old Christian tradition that his church would like to be able to do. After the local mosque is now allowed to broadcast its 110 decibel calls to prayer, the church may now apply to ring bells again. Okay, now that happened this week. What happened afterwards? The Voice of Europe caught this article, and Joshua Cullen of Voice of Europe got it. So, after permission in Vaxholm, Swedish Muslims now want to send calls to prayer all over the country. This is Sweden. Getting permission for the call to prayer in Vaxholm was just the beginning of Sweden's Muslims. While a clear majority of Swedes are against broadcasting the call to prayer, Muslims now seem to want it all over the country. And Avdi Islami, spokesperson for the Muslim Foundation, explains that he wants more mosques to do the same as in Vaxholm. Apply for permission for prayer calls so that the Muslim message can be heard across the country. So they're now coordinating their efforts to run the Muslim call to prayer across the country. And the last article, if I'm going to be really cushion, I know I have only got a few minutes left, but I think this is important. I want you to think about your area, the mosque in your area, and think about what this article is about. And this is in Belgium. This is printed by AFP, I24 News. Saudi-financed Belgian mosques teach hatred of Jews, gays. The manual, this is by, it could be by Philippe Hugen, at least the pictures are. Okay. The manual calls Jews a corrupt, evil, and treacherous people. And it recommends that they be thrown off buildings, describes Jews as evil, reports by the OCAM National Terrorism Monitoring Center. The writings, which are used to train preachers and theology professors, were inspired mainly by classic Islamic law from the Middle Ages. OCAM said in a copy of the report obtained by AFP on Friday, they have problematic content in terms of radicalism, xenophobia, and anti-Semitism. Belgian lawmakers say they will discuss the report next week. The report singled out Arabic language religious training manuals in the Grand Mosque, which is near EU headquarters in Brussels. The Belgian government said in March that it would terminate Saudi Arabia's half-century-old lease of the Grand Mosque over concerns it was promoting radicalism. It had been run by the Muslim World League. Oh, so the Muslim Brotherhood, or we let the Saudi Wahhabists run it. Not much difference there, people. One wants to kill you today, the other one wants to kill you tomorrow. So, anybody surprised with that? But think about this. This is what Saudi money encourages when a mosque gets paid in your area, to be put in your area. Now, we're running out of time. I do want to tell people to go to please go listen to the other shows that we have. Tomorrow, we have a Global Patriot Foundation show and takes care of those. And then Friday we have Dr. Kyle Goldberg, The Logic of Islam. He's on in the morning. Saturday we have Usama Dakdak at an evening show. Sunday we have Erica Kafiristan. Monday we have Alan Vito, Mamma Mia No Sharia. And on Tuesday we have the beautiful Gal Fritzy and Infidels Are Watching. And to come back next Wednesday, I will be here with a brand new guest. God bless you all. This has been a great, great night. I'm going to play that goodbye song, and I could probably go after listening to the gentleman we had today, Len Getz. He's exciting. I could just say I want to share more. I hope I can share more of what he does. Thank you.